Thank you very much for making the time for this interaction. My name is Sundar Ramachandran. I run commercial training for Pfizer for India in the subcontinent region. And that's my set for today, 45 minutes, right? So what I'm going to encourage all of you to do is, whatever devices you guys are carrying, I want to make sure that you have access to this presentation and all the ideas on your personal device, so you don't have to worry about clicking pictures or making notes, and we can have a good immersive conversation, right? So the way to do that is go into the URL that you can see on the screen on whatever device that you're carrying with you, presenting.com/SundarTRG, also happens to be my Twitter handle, so that's my plug right there, right? So can you connect to me on my deck so you have all the material with you on your device, right? And if you're connected, just give me a show of hands, because then we can just get straight into it. Right? So here's what we're going to do. We're talking about the new learning landscape, and I'm sure if you were here yesterday, there's a whole lot of conversation, rhetoric, buzz around mobility, social, analytics. I'm sure all of you have heard all of this yesterday. Yes or no? Quick show of hands, right? But I'm also pretty certain that you've been hearing this over all the various conferences that you guys go and attend, right? And what I find interesting in learning is, if you look at the last 2 or 3 years, the flavor of the season hasn't really changed. I've been hearing about game mechanics, mobility, social, mobile, cloud for the last 2 years, not just in India, but in learning conferences across the globe, right? It's been the same themes. But often it gets very overwhelming for folks like us who are operational practitioners, right? You go back from a conference like this, overwhelmed, not knowing, what the heck, how do I do this, right? How do I tangibly put a structure around it? What do I do? When I go back, what do I tell my teams? What do I tell my management? How do I get started, right? So my intention today, hopefully, whatever we can in 40 minutes, is to really be very tangible, right? So after being in conferences, in the conference circuit, just like all of you for a few years, I've realized that it's important to tell people what's not going to happen. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you why mobility is the next big thing, or how you need to do gamification, because I think a search and SlideShare will give you a lot more information than what I can over the next 30 minutes, right? But what I will tell you is, how do you put structure? If you are realistically assessing the learning landscape in the organizations in which you operate, what can you do about that assessment, right? What would be step 1, 2, 3? Operationally, what do you go and tell your management? How do you upskill your teams to respond to this new landscape? Trainer professional development. So L&D for L&D, if you will. Those are the type of things that we're going to talk about. So you hopefully go away with maybe 1 or 2 tangible ideas, right? So I'm going to ask again, if you're already logged in, you can access my content on your device and we can have a nice immersive conversation. All you got to do is go to presenting.com/SundarTRG. So give me a show of hands if you are already in. Fantastic. So here we go. We're going to start. And my first ask of all of you is to keep your devices on, right? And what I'm using is nothing proprietary. I'm just using a play from the consumer app space, right? And what I intend to do, given I'm talking about modern workplace learning, I have to be a good way to walk the talk as well. What's going to happen is the following. You will see all the material that I present on your personal device, obviously, as well as on the big screen. You and I can have a conversation. But what I find really cool is I'm actually using my mobile device as a clicker. Okay? Not only that, I'm also using my microphone to record everything that I'm saying and all the conversation that you and I are having today. So what you get as an asset, as a content asset at the end of these 40 minutes is, you actually get the entire deck with the voiceover and all the interactions that you're going to have today. Is that cool? Right? So you don't have to really worry about jogging your memory and say, hey, that person made an interesting point and I don't remember it now, and so on and so forth. Is that okay? You're all up for it? Yeah. So keep your devices on. So we are going to talk about the new learning landscape, and my first plug is this. Everything that I'm talking about today is available on Twitter. I've already scheduled these tweets, so you will see my slides on Twitter if you're there already. If not, I'm very happy to have a conversation with you on my blog. All of these ideas are available there. So cut, copy, paste, use for whatever it's worth, it's all available. None of it is proprietary. Is that okay? So if you find value in anything, go ahead, use it. So the big question, right? What's in it for you? What can realistically happen in a 30-minute conversation? I believe these three things will happen, right? Hopefully, you go back knowing what are the right questions to ask. Okay? Can you see my slide on your devices? Yeah? Okay. So what are the right questions? How do you assess the learning landscape? What are the questions that you ought to be asking? And once you know the questions, the next big thing is, how do you gain momentum? This is operational stuff, but important. So it's not enough to go back with questions. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to get your teams aligned around it? How do you make that change happen? Hopefully, you'll get some ideas around it. And most importantly, executive buy-in, right? Some of these things will mean someone's got to write a check, right? And you need to have that conversation to make that happen. So some ideas around that, right? Is that okay? Anything else that you thought you would get and you haven't gotten a flavor of that from what you've heard so far? Yep, go ahead, sir.
My experience has been that one of the most critical elements in getting whatever learning one does, whether it's facilitated or curriculum, so on, so in the work context for adults, what happens thereafter and even before doing that learning. So is that going to be put to use? Are you going to get opportunities to share and teach?
Okay.
Is your boss and your work group going to support it?
Yeah.
If all these three things don't happen, then however effective your delivery mode is, most things that you learn are.
Sure. So that being said, what would you expect me to share with you? That being said, okay, use cases. Right? On how we created a learning track which has these components of pre, in the journey, post. Yes.
And support and involvement of immediate.
Right, you will see that. You will see that. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, so we're going to move on. So the first thing that I want to do is to just broadly give you my 2 cents on what the landscape looks like today. So if someone were to ask you, if you were to go back into your organization today and make a presentation to the board, to the management committee, whoever it is that you are accountable to, and say, hey, the learning landscape has changed, right? Obviously, you know you're going to get sloshed if you just make a broad umbrella statement like that. So you have to give them more, right? So here is my 2 cents on what is really happening, right? And obviously this is not all that there is to it, but just a quick executive summary. So if you look at on the business end, right, what's changing? People that we support, customers that we serve are now agnostic, at least in the business that I operate in, which is commercial sales, to the type of dashboards that we've all produced for years now, right? If you've been guilty of this, give me a show of hand. Say aye if you've done this, if you've put out dashboards which talk about training hours, number of people trained, with all good intention. At some point in your career, we've all done this, right? But today when I go to people and say, I trained 3,000 people, 70,000 hours of learning, the only question is, so what? So what? What does it mean? Right? And I've got to be able to answer that question. So, what are we reporting? Number one. So, an opportunity for you to revisit. So, one of the first things that we did in my organization 2 years back is eliminated, right? 8 out of 10 dashboards that we're producing on a monthly basis because we realized no one looks at it. And the easiest way to figure out the value of a dashboard is stop selling it a couple of months. If somebody wakes up alarmed, you know they value it. If they're indifferent, you shouldn't be selling it anyway. Right? And that's exactly what we did. There were 2 reports where people would get warmed up and say, hey, tell me more about point number 7. And we realized those are the only reports that are getting seen. So why waste time producing all these training hours? And this is what we did. I'm not saying this is a solution, but revisiting what we are reporting to business. It's changing, right? Today, my customers are asking me, you in training possess some portable skill sets. So what can you do beyond training? You guys say you have some communication skills, you say you know employee engagement, You tell me that you can drive change. So beyond training, what are the things that you can do? So example, if I am doing a large scale IT implementation, can you port your skills and help me do change management? Right? Every single external consultant survey that I do says that employer brand is critical. A big part of the employer brand is learning. So can you help me brand us as a learning organization? So that becomes a sticky factor when I go and attract talent. Right? Whose job is that? That could be my job. You say you've got community management skills. Right? There is obviously an enterprise social network in most organizations we work in. So can you create that culture of collaboration in the organization? Can you own these pieces? Are you comfortable? These are the questions that customers are asking. Are you comfortable if I put this on your KPI? Are you willing to take accountability? And I think it's very cool. It's just a way to remain relevant. So in the landscape, can you think beyond training? So today in our KPIs, we do have engagement, learning organization, which is earning the respect of the society and the community. So people see Pfizer as a learning company, right? Helps me attract talent. And that's on my KPI, right? It has nothing to do with conventional training, but it's a big part of what we do. And then last, which I'm sure you've heard about over the last couple of days, is the business is saying, can you move away from just designing and delivering training, which we have traditionally done, to becoming a supply chain manager of knowledge, right? Which means, can you take stock of all the content assets that are floating in the organization, and which sort of talks to the point the gentleman raised earlier. Formal, informal, social, I'm sure you've heard all of this over the last couple of days, right? Can you leverage the tacit knowledge? I've got people who've spent 15 years in this organization, right? They know stuff. How do I ensure that the guy who joins me 3 months back can get up to speed, get some of those perspectives and insights? Because the guy who spent 15 years hasn't bothered documenting it anywhere. It's in his brain, it's in his mind, it's in his way of working. How do you bring that out, right? So can you be a supply chain manager of knowledge and, they don't care if you need to do mobility, SharePoint, enterprise collaboration, whatever. They just ask, how are you managing all the content assets, right? So 3 big questions for all of us as L&D professionals to think about, a good place to start in terms of how the expectations of the business is changing. Your learner is changing as well. You don't need me telling you that, but big talking points. Can you embed learning in the workflow? Have you heard that before? Is that new? You've all heard that before, right? I have a distributed workforce. I've got 3,000 sales force who work literally from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. I've got sales associates in both these cities, right? Any time that I pull them out, even if I do a virtual classroom, is time away from a customer. That's a fact. So interestingly, we get asked, hey, can you just make it a part of the workflow, right? There are moments in an employee's day which are idle moments. Can you convert some of that idle time into learning time, right? It's just a different way of thinking. And this is where all the buzzwords that we hear around bite size and micro, all of that actually fits in right here, because that's the way to embed learning in the daily work. For this to happen, you and I as learning professionals need to know what does the day in the life of a colleague looks like. And you'd be very surprised, at least it took me a lot of time to get that sense of appreciation in my team, right? And I would challenge you, go ask your teams. Do you really have a sense of what does the day in the life of a colleague looks like? Because if you don't know that, how would you know where to embed, where to intervene, so that it doesn't become an interruption to what they're doing, what they're getting paid to do, which is sell, serve, whatever businesses that you guys are in, right? Just-in-time performance support, is that new or have you heard that before? Yeah. How do I pull something when I need it? I don't want to be trained because a trainer became available. I don't want to be trained because you've partnered with some external agency and they've blocked these 2 days, right? In fact, I don't want to be trained at all. I just want to learn, get the information that I need, when I need it, at a point in time on a device of choice, right? That's the conversation that learners are having. Can I just pull something? What can this be? This can be maybe a quick checklist. It can be a quick 4 things to tell the customer. It can be a 2-minute role play video that I watch. This is the best way to position your product. It opens up doors. But I need it at that point in time, and once I've consumed it, I have zero utility for that content. Right? So the shelf life, actually today, there is no shelf for the content that you create. The moment somebody consumes the content, it's done. They never come back to it. Right? And then you create something different. Okay? Anytime, anywhere, any device. Now, this comes with a lot of caveats because if you've been around and if you go to conferences like these, there are vendors, and the first thing when people do when they talk about mobile learning is make the e-learning course available on a mobile device. How many of you have done this? I call it a sin. How many of you have committed it? Right? And we've done it, all of us have done it, right? Like when I was putting together a mobile learning strategy, that's the first thing I did. And I could then go up to my country manager and say, we're mobile now. Because everything you could do on a 15-inch, now you could do on a 5-inch. He looked at me and said, well, nobody liked it on a 15-inch, nobody likes it on a 5-inch. Right? So what's the big deal? So here's what we did. Today our mobility and mobile apps are completely de-linked to e-learning. We don't do e-learning on mobile. It's just a bad place. Especially in the country in which we all live. It's just a bad place to do e-learning. Even if you're able to figure out and package an e-learning in 20 minutes, nobody's got 20 minutes. Right? So there are other mechanisms, there are other 2-3 minute type of content assets that you can deliver, right? And it requires a different type of a mindset in the trainers, and we'll talk about that. But any device, right? 2 years back, we gave every single sales guy in our organization an iPad. Now, we thought we've solved the problem because we institutionalized technology. So everybody had the same iPad. 3,000 people carrying a nice iPad, right? But the truth is, if those of us who travel sometimes with the local trade, the iPad is no good over that 90-minute journey. You know that. If you're a sales guy sitting behind a bike, the iPad is no good. But a podcast on mobile can come in handy. Right? A quick video that you can watch when you're having a chai at a tapri before meeting a customer comes in handy. But iPad is not. So today, while we have the device, we've now opened up and said, well, you decide where you want to consume it. It's available. You want to consume it on an iPad? Go do it. But if not, if this mobile screen works better, go do it. You want to go home and do it on a laptop? Okay. Right, so do you have that enabled in your organization? Good question to ask. The landscape. You've all heard of SMAC? Yeah, social analytics cloud. In learning, we've abused it to the greatest extent possible. If you're on Twitter, there's actually a blog that I wrote a couple of months back on how we can get SMAC right in LME. Just some personal experiments and ideas. But when you think social, are you thinking only your enterprise social? Yammer, Chatter, SharePoint, or whatever it is. How many of you have an enterprise social? I mean, that's now common in most organizations, some form of enterprise social. But what are people doing in enterprise social? What should be your KPI as a training learning function? Right? So when you find the time, look up something, most of you may have heard of it, something that is working out loud. Right? Are you creating that culture in the organization where people share instantaneously? And that's where you document tacit knowledge. Right? Examples, what do? When we put together project teams, we make one KPI as part of the project team's accountabilities. What is that? We call it a daily reflection snippet. So every day, all you got to do is produce an enterprise microblog. And a microblog is nothing but 3, 4, 5 lines saying, today I learned this. Today I partnered with this team in Sri Lanka and I spoke to this gentleman and I totally goofed up. This was my learning. Right? Or I did this and it really worked out well. Such that everybody else who's watching it is learning organically at the same time. Why? Because in the environment that we all live in today, the way we all used to train before, the moral of the story. Right? In the training session, the big thing is always a debrief. Right? You make people do fun stuff, activities, this, that, and then you take them into a corner and say, now I'm going to tell you why we did what we did. We've all been there. done that and we've gone through that as well, right? But today people are asking, I don't want to know the moral of the story. I want to be in the story. I want to know the story as it's getting shaped up. And I don't want you to tell me what are the lessons I should draw from this. I'll draw whatever lessons I'll draw. So just put it out there, and we don't ask people, what did you learn? Right? So are we leveraging that? Mobility, we spoke about that. Analytics. How many of you are using any type of analytics out of data that comes from your LMS? We all have an LMS. We all run reports, LMS reports, right? You'd be surprised. So we have an LMS from one of the partners who's also exhibiting here, and we also have a big data application sitting on top of it, right? Now, you can actually be fooled into buying big data even for LMS. The truth is, if you look at the definition of big data, LMS doesn't produce any big data. Because big data only comes into play when your data is variable. It's non-linear. LMS is so predictable. Everything in LMS is linear, right? But we end up buying stuff like this because we come to conferences like these and got to do big data. And somebody comes and makes a nice fancy presentation. There you go, couple of $1 million, right? But we don't use it at all. And this year we took a conscious call to say we're going to just retire the big data app, because it was sitting there, we were paying for it, and we're not doing anything about it. So most reports that your LMS produces, you can do phenomenal analytics just on a simple Excel sheet. That's the level of analytics that an LMS enables you to do. Okay. We also have a new external learning ecosystem, and this is a use case, and I'll encourage you to revisit. Some of you may be doing this already. We've all heard of BYOD, bring your own device. So my spin on that is, today people are saying BYOL, bring your own learning. What does this mean for you and me? I've got a colleague coming up to me and say, I don't want to learn presentation skills from the one-day course you're sending me to. I want to learn presentation skills from a course that's being offered on Udemy.com, on Coursera. Right? All of a sudden, you've got an employee bringing his own learning to me and asking me to accredit it. So what do? Because, who gave us the authority to decide this is the best course for 20 people? Go sit on it. Right? So here's what we did. When we started seeing this change, last year, we gave people access to a simple, MOOC website called Udemy, udemy.com. Right? And people could go and do courses, and we do two types of things on Udemy, right? It's a free access, so you could learn anything from cooking to photography to selling, right? We don't care. And one of the things that, and you'd be surprised when I was discussing this with our country management, I was actually more apprehensive. I thought they're gonna, dismiss me by saying, how does it help if somebody does a course on photography online? It has nothing to do with what we do here for a living. But one of the business leaders turned around and said, hey, you know what? I actually don't mind that. He said, if somebody does a course on cooking or photography and that makes that person feel better about themselves, I want that person to walk into work with that feeling. Because that helps whatever it is that they are doing. So if learning broadly just makes you a better, fuller person, why not? So people can do whatever, they can learn whatever, but we also do cohorts, right? So again, a use case. What do? Simple thing, like an Excel skills program that most of us do in our organizations for our managers. We used to do a 2-day Excel training program. We realized it wasn't effective, we realized it very late, so we stopped it completely, a blanket ban. Now we go, if you go to Udemy and just do Microsoft Excel, you'll see 10,000 courses on Excel. Basic, intermediate, advanced, all type of stuff, right? What we do now is, when we have managers who want to learn it, sign them up on a 4-week program in a cohort, right? They have to consume the course over a period of 4 weeks. They consume it at a pace that works for them. But what they're accountable for is, every week on a Friday, we'll do a 1-hour virtual classroom with them, WebEx, right? What are we doing? We're just debriefing. So we're saying, well, week 1 was all about, just as an example, pivot tables, right? Here's how at Pfizer, in the role that you are in, we want you to use pivot tables. That's the conversation that happens in the virtual classroom. So really, Generic information you've consumed on an open freeware course, and we are trying to do virtual classrooms and build the context in which you will apply that knowledge, right? And what am I spending? Zilch. No one's coming to Mumbai for a program. Everybody is where they are. We connect once online in a week. The course they consume at their own pace. Everybody gets a certificate out of it. It's much better. And the topic touches them over a course of 4 to 6 weeks. And most of us in this room know this. You don't learn Excel in one day. Right? It stays with you longer. So retention is significantly better. It's embedded in the workflow. Nobody has to travel all the way to Bombay. A 2-day program actually consumes 4 days. Travel, this, that, all nonsense, right? So that's an example of how we're embracing this. And then rethinking learning design, right? So crowdsourcing. Build as you fly. Why? Because today customers are coming up and saying, I have this problem, can you solve it tomorrow or day after? So gone are the days when we said, I'll have to speak to my e-learning partner, there's a SCOM process, I have to package it, I have to design it, 15 days. And in 15 days, we know the market moves. You know, the problem that you were trying to solve is no longer the problem, now it's a different problem, right? So how can you do rapid authoring, right? So what are we doing now? We're now using consumer applications. We've moved away from content authoring tools that come bundled with your LMS. I'm sure most of you have them, an Articulate or a Claro or whatever LMS that you guys use, which help you create content for e-learning. We've moved away. We're using simple consumer apps like VideoScribe. So if you've seen on YouTube those RSA style whiteboard animations, you can go, pay $40 a year, literally, that economical, and get access to something called VideoScribe. And any of your trainers or yourself could create a quick whiteboard animation explaining a concept. We're in the science business, so we have to explain a lot of things. We just find it really handy. 30 minutes, you've got a content asset out there. Right? Windows Movie Maker, another simple example. Right? User-generated content. Get a role play on an iPad, put it on your Movie Maker, annotate it, highlight whatever key points. You've got a 4-minute content asset out there. Throw it out. Right? So that's really that's really how the landscape is changing. Does this make sense? Is there a question, point that you want to expand on, that you want to pause about? Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sabio.
Yes.
You spoke about.
Yeah, the mic is good because then my phone's catching your voice as well. Yep.
Okay, you spoke about how you can rapidly deploy content, the rapid tool which you just spoke of a minute ago. Can you tell us how you measure the effectiveness? Because that's usually the first question that comes up.
Okay.
How do you measure the impact? How do you track whether it's effective?
Yeah.
Because while I'm doing it, I can upload it on my LMS and I can right away deploy it on the traditional tool, and I can also put it on cloud and anywhere
So
else.
how do we measure effectiveness?
Yes.
Is that the key?
That's one part of the question.
Okay.
Second part is, has Pfizer deployed these suggestions you just made, and has it worked for you?
Yeah. So I'll answer both. Yes, so whatever I'm sharing is stuff that we have in the architecture today. Okay? So that's one. Hope that answers. So these are use cases. There are case studies that I've already blogged about, so you can pick it up from Twitter to see the mechanics, right, beyond what this 30 minutes allows. Number two, how do we measure it? I'm coming just to that, right? Okay. Give me a show of hand if any of these things talk to you in the organizations that you work for. If these are areas that keep you awake. Yeah? It's most of us, right? It doesn't really matter if it's distributed, captive. And that's the context you need to keep in mind with all the changes that are happening, right? Because to your point, and this is where I'm launching into ROI, right? It's the holy grail, right? And this is what people are asking. This is what customers are saying. They're saying, please tell me, are you making my people more proficient today than they were yesterday? Right? Whatever the mechanics may be. So I don't care if you do mobile, micro, enterprise, social. I leave the mechanics to you. Just give me a tangible way to tell me that my colleague is more proficient today than he was yesterday, and he'll be more proficient tomorrow than he is today. Right? And if I can move people up the proficiency or competency buckets, that's a direct ROI. Why? Because you can do a simple analysis bucket all your people in based on levels of proficiency, do a correlation with sales, service, whatever business data that you have, depending on the businesses that you're in, and it is no rocket science. The fact is, more proficient people, all things being equal, always produce better results, right? And that's how we do ROI, and I'll talk more about it. So a couple of years back, we gave iPads to our entire field force, okay? We are a field organization, as I said, 3,000 people, and everybody started using it. And here's what we decided. Here's a lesson that we learned 6 months into the implementation. Okay, we realized it's not enough to just make e-learning available on mobile, on the iPad, which is what we did first because nobody was using it anyway, right? We said, how do we provide a colleague an integrated experience on the device? Now, there are 3 things typically a sales guy does. I would actually argue 3 things that most of us do, all of us do. We learn, we perform, and we report. Is there a 4th? You could probably bucket it into one of these 3. So we made sure that not just all the mobility applications, but also the CRM applications are sitting on the iPad. All the marketing collaterals that you need to show to your customer and have a conversation with are sitting on the iPad. So it's an integrated experience. You're not taking out big booklets from your bag to talk to the customer and then going back to the iPad for something else. Okay. At the same time, we launched a mobility app. A mobility app targeted at giving us a tangible way of calculating proficiency or an ROI on whatever it is that we do. Okay? So, I'm going to bring up a quick question for all of you here. When you think of mobility in the context of learning, what are some of the words, phrases that come to your mind? Mobility, this is something we all are hearing now, increasingly, in the context of learning. What comes to your mind?
Access, ready access.
Okay. Access.
Anytime, anywhere.
We always hear that, anytime, anywhere. Micro.
Instantaneous.
Instantaneous.
Self-paced.
Self-paced, self-serve. Okay.
Easy to access.
Easy to access.
Short and precise.
Short and precise. Bite-sized.
Easy
Easy
to
to view. So the user experience. Okay. Just in time.
Link to my business.
Link to my business. Now here's the
provided
thing.
to a large number of people at very low cost.
Cost, it's very, very efficient. Okay. Scalable as well, right? Now here is the deal. Now I'm just using this as an analogy, but this could be mobility, this could be social, this could be analytics, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So when you put together a mobile learning strategy, you may have one already, you may be thinking about it, you will put one together later. What are the things that you should keep in mind? Can you target all of these areas? So let's say mobility. You go back from this conference and say, now I'm going to hardwire mobility into my learning architecture, whatever context that you guys operate in. What do you do? Because this is the starting point where a lot of us, it just becomes very, very fuzzy. Okay? So here's what we did. So we said, when it comes to mobility, right, because the landscape is changing, these are all the use cases of mobility. Right? You could do micro, you could do chunking, BYOD, social, game mechanics, obviously geolocation, you can I have Salesforce, I can tag, I know who's where, when. Analytics and HTML5, which is e-learning, right? The first thing that you want to do, and this is just you could do this for social as well, it's just a process that I'm talking about, is figure out what are you going to go after. So what you see, the pictorials that you see on the right, the small phone, is the areas we said, this is going to be our use case. We don't want to do everything because that will become too fuzzy. We will do mobility, but we will do it for micro learning. So we'll put out short content assets. We'll do social learning. What is social? Because it's mobile, everybody is using it, it's connected, people can have a conversation, you can drive a lot of peer-to-peer. We will do game mechanics. Why? Because, everybody likes a challenge, and this is not gamification. This is game mechanics that I'm talking about, okay? We will do analytics. Okay, which means people leave footprints, they take assessments, they take courses, they have conversations, and you can analyze those footprints, right? And that's where your ROI comes from. And we excluded HTML5. So we excluded e-learning. So we don't, on our mobile learning app, we do not push out any e-learning. Consciously. We don't track people for the simple reason that we decided we will operate, We'll trust you till you prove us wrong. So, I'm not going to tag you and say, I want to know where you are. If you tell me you're with the customer, you are with the customer, right? So those are calls that you could take. And after analyzing, we realized while we marry all of these things that we spoke about, what is it that we want to deliver as an experience? We want to deliver performance support. Okay, so there's a very detailed use case that's available on my blog on how we use mobility to get an ROI and create a learning journey. But a very, very quick executive summary, I'm not going to be able to share the details, is here's what we do. Every single month, we push out 2 assessments to every single colleague in our organization. 2 assessments. This could be product or skills. Okay, these assessments work just like your MOOC assessments work. On every assessment, they get 3 attempts. The best score is what gets counted as their actual score. So there is an incentive for the colleague to keep attempting again and again. And by that way, they also touch the body of knowledge again and again, right? When they get a score out of the assessment, we give a weightage in the background, so there's an algorithm, we give it a 40% weightage because that's your knowledge, what you know about the products that you're going to talk about to your customer. In our business, we also have field visits because we have a feet on street model, right? We have managers who go and work with our sales guys and then observe them in action. At the end of the field trip, they fill out what we call a coaching form, which I'm sure you'll have some type of a coaching form in your context as well. It's nothing but an assessment of the manager based on real observations on the ground, not a simulation. Because it's applicative skills, we give that a 60% weightage. So simple calculation. Knowledge 40%, skill 60%. That, ladies and gentlemen, gives us a proficiency score for every single sales rep across the country. And this happens every month because it's a work now. Yeah? I'm able to then bucket in my dashboards, I'm able to bucket my entire sales organization region-wise on 4 different buckets which correspond to these proficiency scores. So there's a master, there's an advanced, there is a competent, and there is a learner. Are you with me? 4 buckets. Now what does it do for me? I can make my learning very targeted. So who do I go after? Obviously the learners. Do I train the masters? No. Possibly I should be using them as trainers and coaches for the new guys. So I'm able to drive personalized learning, but the ROI conversation becomes really easy and interesting. So what do I go and talk to business leaders? I say in your business unit, you've got 30% folks sitting in the learner bucket, 20% folks sitting in the next bucket, which is competent. If I can move 10% of the competent guys to advanced, would that be an ROI for you? And all that we're arguing or agreeing about is, hey, can you do a 12? Can you do a 15? And I'll say, well, I can only do a 10 or a 12. But it doesn't matter. Oftentimes they'll give you a stretch goal. Chances are you will not meet it. But they're still happy because you can go back and say, hey, I know you wanted 15% to be moved into a higher proficiency. Couldn't do 15, I could do 12. But they turn back and say, hey, that's good. Let's try next month. It's still a very tangible conversation. So it's not about how many people I train, and this is how we measure ROI. The assessments, the content of the assessments is all of these micro-learning assets that we are pushing through the course of the month. Right? So there's a skill aspect, there's a knowledge aspect. So when we started, when you think of the learning landscape, you also have to think of skills. So if you go back from here and sort of gather up your team and say, hey guys, let's just put together a competency model for trainers, right? So before we get to this, I'm going to bring up a quick poll and I'd like you to participate, okay? So here we go. Okay, the Wi-Fi will work, that's okay. So this is a competency model for trainers. Okay, we've just sort of limited it to 4 skill sets. So when you design a learning track or a learning journey for your L&D colleagues, trainers, whatever you call them, we said we're going to focus on these 4 because these are the game changers. So consultative partnering skills. What does that mean? The ability of a trainer to do meaningful needs analysis. The ability of a trainer to have the credibility to go and have a conversation with the business head. Right? And in our business how important that is and how much we fail on that count. Right? Having a credibility where business leaders invite you into meetings that have nothing to do with training. Right? We obviously get invited to issues where learning is an aspect, but do we get invited to other issues? Do we get invited to discussions where they're talking about brand planning? Do we get invited to discussions where there is a strategic roadmap that's being made? Often not. Right? Tell me if it's different. How do you think we can solve this problem? This credibility issue. How do we make sure that, when you talk about seat at the table, I'm sure you hear this all the time. How do we get that seat at the table?
This is something that we've done in Asian Games already.
Yeah.
So, one thing is that as part of all planning discussions, the sales and marketing LNG team that we are involved as a part of the overall planning for the team as well. That has come through one very single thing. We've been able to link the training programs that we've conducted with an overall increase in the business that the sales guys have brought. Right. They've already also included internet.
So you show that correlation.
Yeah, we've been able to show that correlation. And that is the only thing that has built credibility. In fact, when we ask for more credibility, because we still feel that there are some areas in which it can be built further, that's the
perfect. I mean that's a great example. You show the correlation, but that's a very technical, hard-knotted way of doing it. It takes time and effort. Let me share a very simple, stupid way of doing it, which is what we did. So, 2014, when I took up the job, we were not getting invited to these meetings. So here is what we said. We said, hey, there was a strategy meeting that was happening, which was to decide the yearly imperatives for the year. All senior leaders were there. We were not there. Right? So I asked my team, hey, why are we not there? He said, because, we don't get invited to things like this. So here's what we did. He says, hey, you know what, let's just crash the meeting. Right now, most of you know in large organizations, in big meetings, nobody really knows who else is invited. This is a fact. Do you really know who else is there in the meeting? So here's what we did. I took a couple of my senior colleagues. We were there. We showed up. When we showed up, guess what happened? What is the worst that could happen? Because a lot of my colleagues were skeptical. Said, this is not how it works. You can't just show up. I said, what's the worst that can happen? We work for the same company. Are they going to throw us out of the boardroom? That's not going to happen. And here's what actually happened. We were in the meeting. Nobody even realized that we were not on the original invite list. When issues came up, we contributed. There had nothing to do about training. But hey, you and I had experience, business experience. We can talk other stuff. We contributed. And guess what happened from the next time around? The executive assistant of the country manager started putting us on the invites next time on every single event. Just that. I'm not even giving you like an intellectual example. So you can really be stupid and crack this code. If you believe there is a meeting which is important enough for you to be there, my argument or ask would be, show up. What are they going to do with you? Throw you out? That never happens. Show up. Show up and then contribute, and the next time you will be on the official invite list because you've just earned it. Very, very simple way. You can do the hard knot way. You can show the correlation and do that. It'll take 3-6 months. All of that. But this is a simple way we figured it. And now we are there in most of the meetings. Right? So these are the skills that we decided. So we created a track for our trainers in 2014, which the first phase of which wrapped up in January of this year. We called it the Modern Workplace Learning Track. This is an 18-month track that we ran, focused on these 4 things. Now, this could be different for your organization, but for us, this was our focus. How do I get people to understand design? And there are things we did in each of these. Design thinking involved assignments like taking a MOOC, which nobody in my team had ever done before. Now, yours could be different, right? So you could do this faster. That's why it took us 18 months. After taking a MOOC, we made them create a MOOC. Because if you go to udemy.com, you can actually go and create your own online course. And we gave them a simple exercise. We says, go create a MOOC of your own. Let us see who gets the maximum number of enrollments from the open market. Put a small contest around it. Now, obviously, in the open market, if your course is not good, no one's going to take it. So that's a great way to build those skills by giving them a real assignment. Curation and research, so did simple things like get everybody on Twitter, right? Because I truly believe Twitter is a great proxy for what good micro-learning should look like, right? So those of you who are still not convinced, why should I be on Twitter? Be there because that's what good micro-learning should look like. That's what your LMS should look like. Very quick, very conversational. You had a question there at the back.
Sorry, when you're talking about MOOCs, you are tracking them when you're saying that you're creating some cohorts out of MOOCs and using a WebEx on a weekly basis to do a debriefing. So how do you track MOOCs?
So here is what happens.
If you don't mind, I'll quickly place 1 or 2, 3 questions because this became. Then you can continue.
Sure. So on the MOOCs piece, if you go to Udemy or if you go to lynda.com, they do have an offer for a corporate membership.
Okay.
So what you will get as a consequence is a corporate login, right? And think of it like a microsite that gets created within the broad site, and this microsite is for your organization.
Sure.
So it's almost like an extended LMS. So whatever your employees are doing on the microsite, you will be able to at the back end get the reports and dashboards. So if you go to Lynda or Udemy or whatever, normally on the pricing or the packages they'll have a corporate plan. So just go for it. Which it's never more than $12-15 per user per year.
Okay.
So really nothing in that sense.
Sure. I'll not take much time. Only one subsequent question. You haven't talked about training needs of employees anyway. So you kind of moved on and said that people will identify their needs and we'll serve you.
No. So here's what we do. So we are a sales organization. We are very, very focused on needs analysis. How do we do needs analysis? If you remember, I spoke about proficiency a little while back, right? So I get 4 buckets distinctly every single month. What are those buckets? Basic to master, right? So that gives me a health check-in. But within that, there is a breakup, right? How is the proficiency made? It's a combination of knowledge and skills. Knowledge is 40%, skills is 60%. So we do things like when we run an assessment, as an example, 10 questions. In the back end, we run a report at the end of the assessment to see which are the questions that most people got wrong. So that clearly tells me that consistently this body of knowledge is weak. So we'll do a specific intervention around that. Or from our skill reports, from our coaching forms, we will get a common identification to say, everybody seems to be scoring low on closing the deal with the customer. I'm just giving you a hypothetical example. That becomes a real deal. What is cool about this process that we've learned and figured out is, this is not training need, me sitting in a room, which is not how it typically happens, and asking a business leader, what are the training needs you have? How on earth will you know? This is training needs coming from the field, from the people who are observing a skill being applied there in a real market scenario. Now, which one is more credible? The latter, obviously. So we base everything around what we hear from our skill reports, which get produced in the market, rather than going into a conference room and asking somebody, what you want me to train you on? What you want me to train your people on? You get very fuzzy answers, right? They'll say something like communication, negotiation. I mean, it doesn't mean anything, right? Okay, so, and this is, a crowded slides. I really don't expect you to read out from it, but this is available on the blog as well. You can pick it up. This is a self-assessment that we did, right? So we gave this to all of our trainers. You can use this as a template and create one for your context in which you operate. But essentially, we said there are 4 areas. Assess your own self. Business partner, training champion, a subject matter expert, and a learner partner. And each colleague in my team had to give themselves a rating from a 1 to a 4. A 1 being, I have no clue. A 4 being, I can teach this to somebody else. Simple way, right? Now, while we did a broad modern workplace learning track, which was institutional for everybody, this gave me an assessment of who needs to focus on what. So there are some individuals who are very good SMEs, right? However, they just did not have the credibility to be a partner of the business. So you obviously want to, work with them differently, right? So this is like a self-assessment that we did, gave us a lot of insights in terms of how we bring these people up. Once we had an understanding of where my people are, and those are my people as you can see, we then started executing our track, right? And we called it modern workplace learning. If you're on Twitter, the hashtag that you want to track is hashtag MWL. You'll get lots of resources and insights. Okay? So we partnered with one of the foremost global experts, a lady called Jane Hart, who runs the Center for Learning, Performance and Technology. She's based in the UK. And what was really cool was we ran the entire track on a WordPress site, on an enterprise social site. None of my guys went to the UK. She didn't come to Mumbai. She was where she was. We were where we were. Here's what would happen. every week she will post activities and assignments. Right? From simple things like QR codes, the utility of QR codes in learning. And then our job was to consume the content, figure out how this can be applied in the environment in which we are. If it can be, sometimes it cannot be. Right? So every week was a bunch of reading material, blogs, videos, and then an activity. Right? And every week we will have a WebEx session with them. Right? Just to debrief, understand, and we did some meetup events as well. So what you see here is like a local meetup event where everybody comes together once in 15 days and say, hey, what have you learned, what have I learned? This is all happening on an enterprise social. Yeah? So there is a video. Jane has actually spoken about her experience in a conference that she presented last year in London, and she spoke about how her experience with my team and how it was unique. So the video, I believe, is already on Twitter. You can pick it up from there, or you can also pick it up from my blog, right? Or if you're on Google and you just type Jane Hart and Pfizer, I think that's the first video that comes up, right? So somebody you must follow at C4LPT. So this is how we build those skills. And as I said, all of this was happening on enterprise social. So we created an enterprise social. It began with my team in India, and then we realized we're talking about generic stuff. We expanded it to folks in Asia Pac as well. It doesn't hurt if they consume the same information. And we were just getting different ideas. So we had folks from Thailand, Vietnam, our markets in Pakistan, Philippines, coming in, chatting, chugging along, sharing their views. So it just became it exposed all of us to these colleagues and how they approach training in their markets, but it also made for a good collaboration, right? And the focus was on user-generated content. Why were we doing this? We were not doing this just for fun. We were doing this because there is no way a trainer or an L&D pro will be able to design content for a learner if they haven't gone through that experience themselves. Now, how can I expect my trainers to champion enterprise social if they don't know themselves what it means to be in an enterprise social community? How can I tell my trainers to create quick authoring videos if they don't know what it feels like consuming one of those things? So this was our objective, give them hands-on experience on things that they are expected to do as they take this course, right? So a lot of user-generated video. Today we leverage this big time. What do? We find a good sales guy, somebody in our master bucket as an example, who we know is really good at pitching our product to a customer. We'll take the iPad, shoot a very quick and dirty video. It comes back to the head office, goes into the Windows Movie Maker, few edits, audio here and there, annotation, it's out. In 45 minutes, you have a content asset that hits out the market. Right? And it's very cool because now everybody is watching a colleague or a peer of theirs on the video, not me or another colleague. They don't like to watch me or another colleague because they know it's a job, you get paid for this. Now they're watching a guy who they're friends with, and he's coming up and saying, this is the best practice. And they know if they did well, they could get the same recognition opportunity as well. So, we're just at the top of the time, so thank you very much for your time. My ask and my question for all of you is, are you ready to do this? We need to reimagine learning, right? But we're all in this together. No one's got all the answers. This is what we've tried, some results we've got. I'd be very keen to hear your lessons and ideas, right? Again, that's where you will find all the ideas on Twitter and on the blog, and just leaves us enough time for questions. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Switch back to the previous page.
There you go.
Hi. So we're a learning and development company. We've been in traditional training for a bit now. We've launched a learning and development platform which services everything that you've talked about and more. While a lot of our customers are now wanting to move to mobile learning, we still face a lot of challenges and resistance in terms of, are we ready yet to move to mobile learning? And there's still a lot of organizations who still want to stick to traditional training. I was asking if that's, what's your thought around that, and why do you think people are still resisting when we all know that the world is moving to mobility?
Well, I'm a buyer of learning, and my perspective on this is, I don't have to move just because the world is moving. I will move if my world moves because of that trend, right? That's the thing that buyers need to look at. So The challenge that you're talking about, just as a buyer, is I do it because for me, mobility is not a fad. I need this to survive because I have a distributed workforce. There is no other way I can engage my 3,000 learners. So for me, mobility is a indispensable aspect. I have no other way. So we figured out a use case. So as a partner, my two cents would be, are you helping your client or customer figure out what's the use case? Are you giving them a compelling reason where the client feels, the partners I work with are the partners who make me feel, Sundar, the roof is on fire, you got to do something now. Right? So can you bring that value proposition to say, hey, the roof is on fire?
My other question is it then, I agree with you actually, a lot of people who have a lot of distributed workforce are the ones who are more up to it. But does that mean that people who have about 10,000 employees under one roof, does that mean they don't need it?
No, they do. So the organization that I used to work for before I came into the distributed workforce was just that. It was a financial services organization with 4,000 people, shared services in one building, in one floor actually, in Powai. Right? So this is as captive as it gets. We did mobile learning because the use case was different. The use case was, hey, people spend 90 minutes to 2 hours going from Powai to Virar and Vasai on the company bus. What are they going to do? How are you going to engage them? Right? That's my window of opportunity. Right? We were running a lot of certifications because it was a financial services business, and mobility gave us the ability to connect all of them and run peer group discussions. So again, you've got to figure out what's the use case. So I'm going to encourage you to go back to the slide. It's now available on your device. It's going to mail out to you. Put that in front of a client and say, these are all the things you can do in mobile. What are your burning use cases? The challenge is most clients haven't figured out what is the burning issue. Once they figure that out, I think technology is no longer the issue. You can really do this in a matter of days and weeks now. So it's the issue is figuring out what you want to do, right, and why.
Thanks.
Yes, you had a question. You had a question. Okay, so yes.
Good afternoon. I'm a doctoral research scholar from India in Gurgaon. I'm working in the same area how enterprise social media is used by organizations all the way. So I interviewed a couple of organizations and how employees are using it. People are using it for informal chats and also for work-related issues. But the challenge is, from the HR perspective, that how you are measuring and the informal learning part of, most of the learning, like 70 to 80% of the learning at work is mostly informal. In the form, like people are having problem in their coding, they just pop up the screen and.
So I'm going to ask you a question back. Why do you want to measure the ingredient?
No.
My ask always of colleagues in the fraternity is, you go and eat at a restaurant. What do you measure? What do you give feedback on? The damn dish. Right? Do you measure the quality? Do you say, fantastic dish, but this one ingredient was not good? Don't measure the ingredients, measure the output. So whether it's enterprise social, the way you need to look at it is, what's the learning track? You create a learning track, to the question that the gentleman asked earlier. The learning track or the learning journey, which is what people are calling it now, can have pit stops. So I'll give you an example. When we were running certification courses for insurance in one of the organizations I used to work with, we ran it on enterprise social. What was the end goal? Get people certified. That was the measurement. But there was a 3-month learning track. That learning track had pit stops. What were those pit stops? The pit stops involved attending a one-day classroom session, participating in what we used to call chatathon, like fastest finger first on the enterprise social, one every week, helping peers on the enterprise social, connecting to other people who have already cleared the certifications through webinars.
So that means moderation from at least HR.
Not the HR, the trainers.
Yeah, trainers be
Yes.
from the attendee or even other domains. Like
Oh, it does. It needs moderation. That's why in training, if you go back to a previous slide of mine, one of the skills we have to train people on is community management. It requires an understanding of how to manage multiple type of pit stops within a learning track, and what are you measuring? I'm not measuring how effective this conversation on ESM
Asking
was.
is this, like one of the interviewee from the HR domain asked me that if the CXO or the CSO person asked me, so what are the benefits you are deriving out of if you have implemented an enterprise social network? So what are the 3 points in form of measurability? Can I show him?
So this is not a broad talking point, this is a use case. So for example, I can tell you specifically that because of the enterprise social, we hit globally for this process that we're talking about the best certification rates. That's my end ROI. Likewise, you could use enterprise social for crowdsourcing a policy. As an example, let's say in HR you want to create a policy, right? Normally what happens, you create the policy and you push it out. Why don't you put out a policy draft on enterprise social and say, this is how we are thinking. I would encourage, the HR head says, I would encourage everybody to contribute to this policy. How do we want to shape this up? And then you really have a policy at the end of it which has contributions from all. You may not be able to include every single suggestion or idea, but at least a spirit. Now you have really crowdsourced it. It's literally by the employees.
That's what I'm saying, that most of the organizations, some few have that moderation from outside, but if you totally give it to, like you talked about peer-to-peer learning and social learning, then if peers are talking amongst themselves, there are conversations.
Yep.
But if you don't derive meaning out of those conversations, you need to apply some sort of analytics or some sort of you have.
We'll take this offline, but broadly I'll just say I have a slightly different view. You don't have to track everything. It's not required.
Sorry, we're just running out.
So how about
there's another session?
How about we have a chat? I'm around. Let's just connect one-on-one and have a conversation.
Yeah, during lunchtime, I think you can connect. I'm so sorry, the other session is
I'm
going on
around.
in
So
the main hall.
let's catch up right
The
off.
only thing that was that today finally we said what you cannot measure, you cannot improve, you cannot control, you cannot anything. So some way measuring part is important.
You are measuring. I'm just saying. My argument is you're measuring the outcome. Why are you doing enterprise social? It's for an outcome. You need to define that outcome and measure. Yeah, so let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll share enough use cases and how it can.
Maybe you can discuss it during the lunchtime. So thanks for the wonderful
Alright,
session.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Sudhar Ramachandran, on behalf of SHRM, I would request my colleague Amit Sethi to present a small token of our appreciation.